Well, hey, good evening, Port City. We're so excited that you're here. We just got back from Fuse Camp this past week, and we had a blast. We got to know a lot of people. We got some community going on, but we also got to sing and celebrate the name of Jesus. And we're going to do that tonight, jumping right in from the start, and want to invite you into that. So let's worship together. Here we go. People come together, strangers, neighbors, our blood is one. Children of generations, of every nation, kingdom come. Come on, so don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where help comes from. We sing Jesus, Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is in His blood. Oh yes, Jesus, light of heaven, He's a friend forever. His kingdom come. Don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. We sing sweet wine, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good kind. His name is Jesus. We sing sweet wine, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Oh, we sing sweet wine, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. We lift our voice and say, Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is in His blood. It is Jesus, light of heaven, friend forever. His kingdom come. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. louder than the unbelief. I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody, and I raise a hallelujah. Heaven comes to fight for me. Oh yes it does. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm, louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praise and roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. And I raise a hallelujah with everything inside of me. I raise a hallelujah, and I will watch the darkness flee. And I raise a hallelujah in the middle of it all, in the middle of the mystery. And I raise a hallelujah with no more fear. 'Cause fear, you lost your hold on me. I'm gonna sing. Oh, I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm, louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praise and roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. So tonight we raise our hallelujah, we lift our melody of Jesus, our melody of hope above our chaos, above all that we face. Let's sing this together. Sing a little louder. You sing a little louder. I'm gonna sing a little louder. You sing a little louder. Oh, sing a little louder. You sing a little louder. Oh, sing a little louder. You sing a little louder. Sing a little louder. In the presence of my enemies. Sing a little louder. Louder than the unbelief. Sing a little louder. alive. It's why we sing, it's why we celebrate, and it's why we wanted to end with this next tag that's been around for so long, that gives us an opportunity to surrender our hearts, maybe even open our hands or raise our hands as a sign of surrender tonight. And so we just want to invite you into that. This song's been around for a while. I grew up with it in youth group, and it's just an unbelievable song. Let's sing this together. And I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours. We sing it again now. And I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours, oh Lord. I'll stand, and I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours. I'll stand, and I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours. All we are, we say it all. I am is yours. One more time we say it all. I am is yours. Let's just sing that one more time. So I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it. Yes, he did. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours, oh Jesus. Let's pray together. God, we stand tonight. We declare that you are worthy. You are worthy of our praise. You are worthy of our adoration. But most of all, you are worthy of our lives. And God, as we walk through our lives, we tend to hold on to things. We tend to tighten our grip because we trust ourselves. But would you begin tonight to give us the courage to begin to loosen our grip, to open our hands, to open our lives, to open our hearts and surrender our souls to you and your will? Would you remind us that we can trust you, that we can put our hope in you tonight? God, we thank you for Jesus, for the sacrifice that he made. We thank you that tonight the King is alive. And we celebrate that, and we pray in the name of our King, Jesus. Amen. Hey, thank you guys for singing. You can go ahead and have a seat at this time. I would love to invite the host team forward to receive the offering.
It's really hard to have a bad night when that last song comes on, isn't it? I saw so many of you like nodding your head. And how are you tonight? Everybody good? Any Lion King fans in the house? Are there any Lion King fans? Me too. There's a reason why I wanted us to watch that clip, and it really revolves around one simple idea that every single person in this room has a story. All of us in this room have a story. And I hope this is not a spoiler, or let this be a spoiler alert for those of you that haven't seen The Lion King. First of all, welcome to this century. But for those of you that haven't seen The Lion King, the basic premise of the movie, of the story, of the narrative, a narrative that is so powerful, and I am of the opinion is ours, that Simba is given a label by his uncle. And he believes it. And because he's given that label by his uncle, it sends him into this horrible tailspin for most of his life. And I would propose that is a lot of us in this room. Every single one of us in this room have a story. There's a reason why you believe what you believe about yourself. There's a reason why you live behind the label that you've received, whether it's from yourself or someone else. There are very mature grown men in this room, and you see yourself the way you see yourself because of something your dad either said or didn't say to you. There are those of us in this room who have unbelievable potential, and you're unbelievably successful, but you cannot get past what someone said or didn't say or thought about you. Beautiful ladies in the room, which by the way, ladies, is all of you, but you look in the mirror and you tell yourself things about yourself that are not true, and the reason why you believe those things about yourself is because someone has given you that label or has spoken that narrative over you for so long, but that's what you believe. And here's what all of us know, if we can dive in quickly. What all of us know is that every single person in this room has a backstory. There is a reason why you are the way that you are and you believe what you believe. And if we could just get to the backstory, it would change so much of our perspective of not only ourselves, but the people we're sitting beside in our world. There was an unbelievable illustration for me this past basketball season. If you're a Duke basketball fan, you may remember this, but in the middle of a Duke game against Syracuse, the camera went to a close-up of Syracuse's coach, Jim Boeheim. And I don't know if you noticed the close-up, but it appears as if Jim Boeheim had peed his pants. Which, as a Duke fan, and when you looked on social media, everybody was going crazy making fun of Jim Boeheim for making a mess in his pants during the game. Until someone spoke up and said, well, what you don't realize and what you haven't thought about is that Jim Boeheim had prostate cancer. And one of the effects of his surgery is now he has a difficult time controlling his bladder. Doesn't that change everything? And here we sit, scores of us in this room, and here's what you know to be true of you. When you know someone's story, when you know the backstory, when you know what's really going on, their life and their decisions start making a little more sense. Let me make it personal. The very first thing someone said to me today when I walked in this building this morning, someone complimented me on my shoes. Now, I don't know how many of you can see my shoes, but I'm proud of my shoes. And I get that a lot when I've come here over the years and when I speak to teenagers. Part of that is because I have 3 young adult children that are like, Dad, you're old, so you need to keep your shoe game up. But there's a bigger reason why I always like wearing cool tennis shoes. And it's a very simple reason. When I was growing up, we were poor. We weren't poor, we was po, okay? We couldn't even afford the other O and R, all right? And because of that, I constantly wore raggedy, passed down shoes. And I cannot tell you how many times when I was in elementary school, in middle school, and even in high school, somebody made fun of me because of the kind of shoes that I had on. I stole the money to buy my first pair of Nikes. I'm not proud of that. I paid dearly for that. Thank you, Dad. And you don't have to agree with why I wear these shoes. You don't even have to like why I wear these shoes. But isn't it interesting how understanding the backstory helps you understand why? And all of us in this room, there is something like that going on in your life where there is a backstory. When you know my story, stuff starts making more sense. But the problem for all of us in this room, the problem for all of us that are listening, the problem for all of us that are wrestling with this is I can't know your story just by what I see. There's this old maxim, what you see is what you get. That is incredibly true. But I would also add, what you see is what people show. And here we sit, many of us, master artists at controlling our narrative. Because here's what you've decided to do. You've decided to only let people in just a little bit. Or you've decided to believe the label that's been handed to you and nobody knows who you really are. And it's really easy to judge people by what you see on the surface. But if we get really, really honest, it means most of us in this room, we're shallow. We simply look at the veneer and we don't get past the surface. And it's why we're calling this series The Shallows. Because I think you would agree that we've been created for more than just living in really shallow living, in a shallow life as it relates to other people, in a shallow life as it relates to our relationship with God. And understand this, shallow is not always a bad thing. Right? Shallow, if you think about it, in small amounts can provide some relief, but shallow all the time can leave you empty. In small amounts, shallow can provide some relief if you feel like, oh, I don't have to drop anchor with this person or in this relationship, but shallow all the time can leave you empty. Shallow in some relationships, if we get honest with ourselves, just makes us polite. Some of you have practiced shallowness already tonight. When you walked in, this is what you did, right, ladies? Oh, you look so good. I like that outfit. And men, hopefully not, but that may have happened. But you said that to someone, let's be honest, shallowness as it relates to some relationships, it just makes you polite. But shallowness as it relates to every relationship makes you lonely. Heads up, that's why we have a generation, the next generation that's coming behind most of us in this room. They are the most digitally connected generation that's ever existed in our country. They have thousands and thousands of followers on social media, and they're the loneliest generation that's ever lived. Because shallow with every relationship makes you lonely. Shallow is okay some of the time, but shallow all the time is dangerous. And here's what I would propose tonight and at the beginning of the outset of this series. We have a tendency to think that the opposite of shallow is deep. And we equate that not only with our relationships, but we especially equate it with our religion and with our faith. And we think what we need to do is go deeper with God. We need to know more about God. We need to, in many ways, and Mike said this a couple of times today, it becomes like this trivia contest. The more we can gather information, then the deeper we become. I would propose that the opposite of shallow is not deep. The opposite of shallow is personal. Those of us in this room who are experiencing unbelievable depth in life, that is happening because in some regard, there is some relationship that is deeply, deeply personal to you. The opposite of shallow is personal. But what that also means is that most of us in this room, you and I have become professional label makers. What we literally do is we operate in life as people who just decide this is who they are, and this is who he is, and this is who she is, and this is what she's about, and this is what they're going through, and nobody gets personal. And let me tell you part of the reason why that's dangerous. If you are a parent in the room, hear me and hear me well. First of all, I am with you. Kelly and I are the parents of 3, but all of us know this because we are the living proof of this. Our children, moms and dads, are being shaped by things we have either said or not said to them. Our children are being shaped by words we have spoken into them or we've never said to them. The birthplace of your words, parents, is so important because they are either born from hurt or hope. We are literally shaping the next generation by the labels that we give them. And the reason we give them labels is because we have become professional label makers. And the reason why we are professional label makers is because we live in the shallows. And isn't this true for all of us in this room, young or old? The labels you receive from your family, the labels your family gives you, hurt the most and last the longest. And so that's what we're gonna wrestle with for the next 3 weeks. That's what, hopefully for some of us, we're gonna try to get our arms around. What does that mean? What does it mean for us to move out of the shallows and make this life really, really personal for all of us in this room? And it will be a difficult task for a lot of us. It will be tough sledding for some of us, but it is so incredibly important because I'm of the persuasion that God has intentionally slanted and tilted the universe in one direction so that we will not live in the shallows. And that tilt, that direction, is toward relationships where we get personal. So here's what we're gonna do tonight. If you brought your Bible, I would love for you to turn here to Luke chapter 8. If you didn't bring it, we're gonna throw these verses up on the TV Bible here. And while you're turning there, let me give you a heads up of what is happening in Luke chapter 8. Matthew, Mark, and Luke record this story that we're gonna talk about. If you don't do the whole Jesus, God, Bible, church thing much, for those of you that care, the reason why so many of us in this room were singing with such passion and conviction, not only about Jesus, but to Jesus, is because so many of us in this room consider ourselves Jesus people. Are there Jesus people here maybe? All right, we consider ourselves Jesus people, and the reason we consider ourselves Jesus people is we believe that there was a real person named Jesus who lived, a real person named Jesus who died, and this is the most important thing to all of us in this room, whether we believe it or not, or realize it or not. We believe there's a real person named Jesus who rose from the dead after he died. And you should get excited about that. And I will say this until I can't speak anymore. If you're not impressed by the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, try it. Die and try to come back to life. Bro, you come back to life, I might follow you. But that's what we do. We are so excited because Jesus rose from the dead. And we are not basing our excitement and our narrative on just legend and myth. No, we have actual people who either interviewed people who are eyewitnesses or were eyewitnesses to things that Jesus did. Where we pick up on his story tonight in Luke chapter 8, Jesus has already chronologically performed 13 miracles when we get to this story. 13 miracles he's already performed. And just a few back from the one we look at tonight, he actually raised a widow's son from the dead. Jesus didn't just raise himself from the dead, he actually raised someone else from the dead. And can we all just agree that if you raise somebody from the dead, word gets out about that and you become insta-famous insta-famously. So word had gotten out, Jesus has raised someone from the dead. Not only did he raise someone from the dead, but he also spoke to the ocean. You guys appreciate this in Wilmington. He spoke to the ocean and the ocean chilled. So he's got that going for him, which is awesome. And then right before this story we look at, there's a reason why he walked around the lake and people were waiting on him. Right before this story begins to happen, Jesus had looked at a demon-possessed man and cast the demons out of that man into pigs who ran themselves off a cliff. Now that's what the scriptures tell us. So needless to say, Jesus has people's attention. He's become an influencer in a social media-less world. And everybody wants to get around him. Everyone is clamoring to be around this Jesus. Jesus walks around the lake after he's cast these demons into the pigs that went off the cliff into the lake. And on the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. Why were they waiting for him? He raised a widow's son from the dead. He calmed the sea. He cast demons into pigs. You would want to wait on that guy too. And as they're waiting for them, or for him, a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue. That's a really important detail that Luke gives us. Jairus is a Jewish leader in the synagogue. Jairus came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. Now, this wasn't like him fanboying Jesus. There was a reason why he fell at his feet. And Luke tells us why he fell at his feet. His only daughter, who was in middle school, a 12-year-old, was home dying. Parents, isn't it interesting how desperate we get when it's our kids? Do you understand what this man did? Most of the Jews that were alive during this time that Jesus is doing all these miracles don't think that Jesus is who he proved himself to be, especially people who were leaders in the synagogue. But Jairus is so desperate that he throws himself at Jesus' feet and he says, "Can you please come home because my daughter's dying?" Jesus does it. He begins to make his way home with Jairus. As Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds, which happened a ton with Jesus. There were always crowds around him, but especially, again, after you've raised a boy from the dead, told the ocean to be still, and you've cast demons into pigs that go into the water, there's a crowd. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. Now, let's take a time out right there, and let me speak to the ladies. And I want to be very discreet here. But does everybody understand the detail that Luke is giving us? And this is so incredibly important. This woman had not only had her regular menstrual cycle every month, but she didn't stop bleeding for 12 years. And every woman in this room is going, "Oh my God." No wonder she's in the crowd. And we also know that she didn't dig this predicament she was in because she had been looking for a cure and she hadn't found one. Now, it's obvious that physically you would want to look for a cure for that, right, ladies? Because that's a difficult time, because not only is she bleeding consistently for 12 consecutive years, but it also means for 12 years, she's been in a bad mood, okay? It's been rough. And it means all the men in her life are like, one minute she can be like, "I love you," the next minute, "We are many." It can change. But here's why it was a bigger issue. Levitical law said this in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25, and the Jews held very strictly to Levitical law. Levitical law said this, that if there is a woman who bleeds past her normal menstrual cycle and continues to bleed, she is to be considered unclean until that's corrected. And by unclean, this is what the Levitical law meant. You should treat her like you do someone with the plague, someone with leprosy, an adulterer. In fact, history tells us that anyone that was considered unclean, they would make mockery of them anytime they were in public. This is that woman. And this is how desperate she is. She's looked for a cure. She hasn't found one. She's been bleeding consistently for 12 years. And she decides to do something that all of us, if you think about it, this is like that knot in your throat moment. I am going to put myself out where people may see me, and if they see me, they're gonna talk about me, but I gotta get to Jesus because I'm tired of the label I have. Now, this is an interesting detail. If you'll go to the next slide. This is an interesting detail. I love the fact that Luke tells us that she came up behind Jesus. Now, let me tell you why I think she did that. I think she came up behind Jesus because if she was out in front of him, that would have meant that she would have put herself out in front of everyone, which would have meant that if she was out in front of everyone, all the people, since there were so many people, would have immediately, when you have this kind of issue for 12 years in the small community where she lived, everyone knew who she was. If she gets out in front of Jesus, then immediately everyone's gonna see her and they're gonna begin to point and yell and scream, "Unclean! Why are you here? Get away!" The religious leaders, Jewish custom, the religious leaders actually had the right to be physically abusive to her to make her leave. She comes up from behind him. I'm of the opinion that she did that. She probably had hid herself so that people didn't recognize her. Jesus has passed by, and as he passes by, everybody's attention goes with Jesus. And I don't think she was like, excuse me, let me get to Jesus. I think she had made up her mind, I got one shot. She goes Eminem, right? If you get one shot, what are you gonna do? And she decides to sprint. And she sprints because all she knows she needs to do is to touch him. And maybe I'm taking some liberties I shouldn't, but in my mind's eye, she sprints and she dives to touch the fringe of his robe. Now, there's unbelievable theological depth in that idea of fringe of the robe. We could talk about some other time, but what I want you to get is this. She touches the fringe of his robe, and the bleeding stops immediately. But here's the problem. Now she's in the open. Now everybody sees her. And now everybody is thinking about her label. Isn't it interesting how culture seems to always want to label you by your issues? Everybody in this room, this is what culture does to us. It labels us by our issues. What do you mean by my issues? Let me get specific. I've made a list. That's something that you did. That when you walked in, or you walk into school, or you walk into work, or you go home for Thanksgiving, everybody immediately brings it up. You are nothing more than the mistake that you made, the choice that you made, the something you did. Let me get really personal. Maybe it's not something you did. Maybe it was something that was done to you. If I may, in a crowd this size, there's a very high probability that there's someone listening to me, and maybe no one has ever heard you tell this story, but you were emotionally, physically, sexually abused. You were raped. Something that was done to you. And nobody knows about it, but that's how you label yourself. Because you think about it all the time. It's what haunts you. Or maybe it's your appearance. Isn't it amazing how we get so caught up on what we look like or don't look like? Maybe it's not your appearance, maybe it's your family. And so you don't want to look at the people next to you right now, but that's what you're thinking. You know, because Stuart just dropped the awkward bomb, right? So, but it's your family. And you are a part of them. You really didn't have a choice in it. You were just born into the family, but because you were born in the family, now you carry that name and everybody knows you. Or maybe it's a mistake you made. And some of you are looking at your spouse. That's not cool. All right, don't do that. I know, I told my wife to embrace her mistakes and she hugged me. But anyway, so. Ma'am, I don't think it's as funny as you think it is. Maybe it's who you married. And he or she comes with collateral damage. You carry a label. Or it's who you dated, for all the single people in the house. You can't get past it because you're haunted by him or her or that time. And isn't it interesting what those labels have done to you? Isn't it interesting that much like this girl, they've created limits in your life? Your labels have created limits. Just like her. It's why you sit here tonight, and this is what's going on with you. What's going on with you is that these labels have created these kind of limits where you literally go, okay, I'm not gonna try. The reason why I don't try is because of how I see myself and how other people see me. So I'm gonna stop trying, or I'm gonna stop reaching, or I'm gonna stop welcoming, or I'm gonna stop accepting, or I'm gonna stop risking, all because of what someone has said or hadn't said, or something that happened to you. You literally, like this woman, culture goes, this is who you are and nothing more. And you decide, and I decide, and we decide to stay in the shallows. We don't want to go personal. Let's just keep it on the outside because it's so much more comfortable. I need to push, and this is going to stink. But for most of us in this room, you're shallow. And the reason you're shallow is you can't get past the labels. You can't get past how you see yourself and how other people see you. I think with the woman with the blood issue, her limits had literally, or her labels had literally done this. It had started convincing her that there's a limit to who you could be and what you can do. And what does she do? Maybe what you've decided to do by being here tonight, or this faith journey that you've started, or this faith journey that you've rebooted. She decided, like you, maybe this Jesus can do something. The next part of the story, the details that Luke gives us, I find so fascinating and so interesting. Because get this picture in your mind. Jesus is being surrounded by people. It literally is a picture of a rock star being walked to their bus and there is no security. The security is not working and everybody's touching him. And because everybody's touching him, it makes what he says next so unbelievable. Jesus literally, as she touches, not even physically so he could feel her, he just touched the fringe of his robe, Jesus goes, "Who touched me?" And his disciples responded the same way you would respond. They're looking at everybody touching him, and they're going, "Dude, really?" In fact, Peter says, "Master, this whole crowd is pressing up against you." In other words, the Stuart Hall paraphrase, "Bro, everybody's touching you. And you're going, 'Who touched me?' Are you being like a prima donna right now? Is that what you're doing, Jesus? Who touched me?" And then this is one of the few things in the scriptures, especially in the account of Jesus, that kind of gives me a spooky feeling, because here's how Jesus responds to this. Jesus said, "Someone deliberately touched me, for I felt the healing power leave me." It's close to Star Wars, the Force be with you stuff, okay? Jesus literally is like, "I feel weaker because the power has left me." Which is really, if you don't do the Jesus God Bible Church thing much, I get it, weird. Until you see what happens next. Jesus says, "I felt the power leave me." Now remember this. This woman has somehow, some way gotten to Jesus. Now she's busted because she's out in the open. And because she's out in the open, Jesus has stopped and gone, "Who touched me?" Well, as he's turning, he had to have been hearing people go, "Unclean! Her! The woman with the blood issue, get out of here. You're ruining this. Jairus' daughter is dying. What? Move!" And when the woman realized that she couldn't stay hidden. Why couldn't she stay hidden? She's probably now laying in the path that he had just left. And people now are pointing at her. And who knows if someone hasn't kicked her. When she realizes that she can't stay hidden, she began to tremble. She gets up and she falls on her knees in front of him. And you know, the chorus of all the labelers gets louder. But what does she do? She does this. The whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him and that she had been immediately healed. Because remember, as a Jew, you had a responsibility as someone that was unclean to not touch anybody as well. She explains to the crowd, I just needed to get to Jesus and I touched him and I promise I'm not bleeding anymore. And you know that all the labeling skeptics went, yeah, right. But Jesus shut him up because he said, woman who bleeds for 12 years. Lady that wasn't supposed to touch me. Woman who stayed hidden and then all of a sudden dove and touched the fringe of my robe. No, he calls her daughter. Because the opposite of shallow isn't deep. The opposite of shallow is personal. He sees her in a way nobody else sees her. And I know, I get it. Some of you are hearing this story and you're like, really? There's nobody in this room, Stuart, that has experienced something to that extreme or been labeled something to that extreme. You're exactly right. Most of us hadn't, but this has happened to you or it's happening to you. These are words for some of us that describe one of us in some way, shape, or form. Right? The lady in the room that everybody tells you you're extra. You're just a little over the top. You're a lot over the top. Or you're the opposite. You're basic. You're a loser. You've heard that before. You're a failure. You're a freak. You're just a geek. You're a womanizer. You're an adulterer. You feel that. You're an addict. That's all you'll ever be. You're just an addict. Or you just party all the time. You're just a partier. You're a drunk. Oh, they're just a drunk. Or all you are is a jock. You're just an athlete. Maybe what stings you is whether it was your husband or your wife or a parent or a friend, they called you fat. And by the way, some of you going, these are childish things. These are teenager issues. Really? Is that the reason why there's so much emotion in everybody's eyes that are listening to me? And may I remind you, as I do often, grown-ups are just teenagers who owe people money. Or skinny. You're ugly. Maybe there's a lady and a man has spoken that over you or your parents at some point. You can't get past it. Or there's a man. Or you're pretty. For some of you, it stings worse than being called ugly. All you are is pretty. Or you're rude. Or you're useless. Or annoying. Or boring. Or for all the adults in the room, let me introduce you to a Generation Z term called slim thick. The most impossible physical standard for females you will ever hear. We want you to be rail thin, but curvy in all the right spots. Slim thick. Consider yourself educated. It's so impossible. There are girls going, you are exactly right. Isn't it impossible? 6-pack abs and a booty? I mean, what? That doesn't work. Sorry, I said booty. Rich. You're just rich. They're just rich. That's what rich people do. That's what wealthy people do. Or poor. Divorced. Oh, they're divorced. Psst, they're not divorced. They're separated. Or here's one, dad, absent. black or Latino or Asian. And yes, you're exactly right. I didn't put white on the board because most of us don't even understand, those of us who are Caucasian in the room, the privilege that is associated with our race. Rebellious, worthless, entitled, punk, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, pansexual, smart, dumb, and right under those, Republican and Democrat. And I could add liberal, conservative, independent, a prude, fatherless, lame, insecure. You're just a thug. And just like a woman who's trying to explain to everybody, I just needed to get close to Jesus, and is scared to death at how he will respond, because you've decided for most of your life that this will be who you are. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, here's what Jesus says to you. You think this is who you are? No. You are my son. You are my daughter. Don't you dare ever believe anything else, because that's who you really are. And it sucks the air out of the room, because most of us in this room, we have learned how to survive in the shallows for so long that something that personal almost seems invasive. For you to be called, wow, a son, a daughter of the creator of the universe. That's how he sees you. And to kind of help us maybe wrap our hearts and minds around that as we go, if you were here a couple years ago, I think I introduced you guys to a young lady that's very important to our family. This picture was taken when our son was a junior, our oldest daughter was in middle school, and our youngest daughter, Cameron, was in third grade. And the young lady that I told you guys about is this young lady right here, Casey. Casey and our youngest daughter, Cameron, became very best friends in third grade. The way they became best friends, my daughter was attending a brand new school. She had never met Casey before. Casey was in front of her getting on a bus to go on a field trip. My daughter was standing right behind her, and if you are a woman of color, you know that it's not really a cool idea for anyone to touch your hair, and my daughter reached up and touched Casey's hair. Fortunately, as she touched Casey's hair, she said, "Your hair," my daughter said, "your hair is so pretty." And Casey turned around and said, "Thank you, sit with me on the bus." Because that's what kids do. And they became the best of friends. Interestingly enough, on that same field trip, my wife was a chaperone and Casey's mom was a chaperone. They didn't know each other. And as a part of the field trip, they went to this place in Atlanta where I live called the Varsity. If you ever get a chance to go to the Varsity, don't. If you like diarrhea, it's a great place to go. But I would highly recommend no, okay? But it just so happened as chaperones that my wife and Casey's mom wound up sitting at the same table. And they started talking and they developed a friendship. And if you were here a couple of years ago, you know that what began to transpire is that my daughter would constantly ask Casey to come over to our house, go out to eat with us, go on trips with us, and Casey's mom would always say no. Eventually, we earned I appreciated that. Because stranger danger, they do not know us. But eventually we learned why her mom was so careful. The reason why her mom was so careful, part of it, to be very candid, is we were white, they were black. But most of it was because Casey's father had been murdered. Her dad was a bodyguard for a very famous rapper. If I told you who it was, you would know. And he was gunned down outside a club in Atlanta. They were scared to death to trust anybody. But what has happened over the course of however many years is that Casey has become like my daughter. This is a picture of us and you can go back to that other picture. This is a picture of us on one of the many spring breaks, not this one, that Casey went with us. Almost every spring break in high school, she was with us. And that other picture that you saw, you can go there now, is Casey, her mom, my wife, and youngest daughter at graduation this past May from high school. But when Casey got ready to start applying for college, she called me and she said, Mr. Stewart, would you help me write my essay? And I'm like, absolutely. What are you going to write about? Mind you, she has never once talked to me about the death of her dad. She doesn't talk to anybody about the death of her dad. Casey is so misunderstood by so many friends and so many people. She says, I want to talk about my dad. And here's what I would love to do as we get ready to go home and to the beach and go out to dinner. I just want to read you an excerpt from her essay. All I really did with this essay is helped her change some sentences, move some sentences around. But here's what you're going to find out. That there's a reason why people are the way they are. Here's what she said. Growing older has not made dealing with this personal void, the death of her dad, any easier. It seems at every turn I'm reminded that I am fatherless. In the 3rd grade, our class was asked to write about one wish we each had. And of course, I wrote that my one wish is that my dad would come back to life. Reading that 3rd grade wish today brings a wave of emotion that I can't hold back. I weep thinking of 9-year-old Casey saying, I'll never go to a father-daughter dance because to this day it's still true. And some of you know this to be true. People who claim it gets easier lie. It doesn't get easier. On the contrary, it seems to grow heavier, to become harder, to feel more painful, and I become lost in the loss. That is why she says I write. When a tsunami of tears, fear, self-pity, anxiety, heartbreak, heartache move over me in stalls, dumping accusations, excuses, anger, rage, and sorrow, I write. Through streams of tears and silent screams more times than not, I write. Regarding the subject I prefer not to talk to people about, instead I write. I write about my feelings as I cry, and sometimes when I'm brave or when I feel lighter, and even when I want to remember, I go back and read what is poured from the deepest recesses of the deepest parts of me, paper stained with the liquid expression of my heart being broken again and again and again. And this is where it gets personal for you. My loss defines my life on a day-to-day basis, every single day. With everything I do, I try to be the best at it. So at the very least, it seems like I have it all together and I'm not completely lost. I throw myself into my schoolwork so that when people see my grades, they see the opposite of the statistic they expect. Most people expect a young black woman in my situation because they're angry, because they're hurting, because they don't know how to cope with their feelings, because they are fatherless, to go down the wrong path, to make irreversible choices. My loss, regardless of how deep, despite the void that cannot be filled, will not destroy me. Yes, it has defined me, but I will not be a statistic. I will not continue to be the label that everybody thinks I should be. She concludes by saying, my mother always says that God gives his toughest battles to his strongest people. My faith in God has given me the strength to trust in my mom's words of comfort, but I would be less than honest if I didn't admit I never asked to be this strong. And to Casey, and to you, sir, and to you, ma'am, and to a woman who had struggled with pain, confusion, frustration, and a label for 12 years. Jesus says this to you tonight. From the shallows to being very personal. You are my son. You are my daughter. You are mine. Because everybody needs to be seen the way Jesus sees us once in their life. Let me pray for us. Jesus, here's what I ask for all of us as we get ready to go home. That we would move from the shallows and into what's personal. And it will mean that some of us will have to muster, we will have to tap into more courage than we've ever had to tap into before. But the shallows, Jesus, we admit to you, leaves us empty, leaves us lonely. We're tired of it. So I pray, Spirit of God, for that man who is rattled tonight because he recognizes that his identity has been wrapped in a label that is not true. The woman who sits in the same place tonight. This board basically tips them off to who they've become. I pray, Spirit of God, that you would do something so deep and rich in their heart, and you would do it by becoming so intensely personal to us all. And I pray this in the only name that matters, the name of Jesus. Amen.
Yeah, it was pretty good, wasn't it? Isaiah Stewart, nice shoes, right? Hey, listen, this is a really, Stuart and I have been talking about this. This is a really important series for our church. This is sort of a dialogue that we've been having in some of our leadership circles as we are discerning just what God is doing in our church. And part of what we want to be able to do is to really understand, what's happening in our lives, in your life. I mean, every week you walk in here and you experience something in the service that God speaks to you. You experience God in some way. We want to know what you think about your experience with your church. And so we thought, the best way to do this is have conversations, but to have coffee with every one of you would take about 8 years, and we don't have that kind of time. So what we really want is to be able to understand, to be able to hear your voice in what you believe God is doing and what you're sensing, what you're experiencing as a part of Port City Church. And so the best way we thought to do that was to do it digitally. And so we've created this forum or this forum for you. It's called portcitychurch.org/afterthoughts. This is not for you to tell me what you liked or didn't like about Stuart's message. You can do that, but this is not the place for it. Part of what this is that we believe that as we start to understand what our voice is in our community, that your voice is actually a part of that. And this is a chance for us to hear and understand what your voice is as it becomes our voice. One of the big challenges that we're gonna face is how does a community, a people, a collection operate in unity and as one? And this is an important part of that process. So what I'm gonna, I trust your heart in responding to this, and I ask you to trust our heart in asking this. We're not putting our finger to the wind and try to see which way the wind's blowing. We want to understand what you perceive or what you believe God is doing in you so that we can understand what God is doing and wants to do through us, right? That's what we're going to do. So we ask you to do that. Stuart's, next couple weeks are going to be really important for us because a lot of us do this. We think that, I need to go deeper, And what happens is we end up substituting a bunch of trivia about God instead of really understanding how personal God wants to get with us, and he's demonstrated that in his son, Jesus. So we're gonna be looking forward to hearing from Stuart the next couple of weeks. Thank you guys for being here. I think Stuart and I will be down front if we can help. Thanks, we'll see you guys next week, okay? Don't forget to do this. Thank you.